Doug! Did you know that Woody Harrelson turned 64 years old today?
All I know, man, it's got to be 420 somewhere.
As the kids would say, you are so chuggy. Welcome to the Diehards, the show that digs deeper so you can dominate your leagues. Tonight, we are cutting through the noise and getting back to the basics, or what should be the basics. We're laying out the top rules for drafting a winning fantasy team in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or gearing up for your first big draft, these are the principles that separate the contenders from the pretenders. I am your host, J.J. Wenner. And as always, I'm joined by the fantasy orthicle himself, Doug Orth. And tonight, we are joined by one of the most respected voices in the fantasy world, the great Scott Pianowski. He is an FSWA Hall of Famer, an award-winning writer and podcaster, and a longtime staple at Yahoo Sports, where he's been delivering sharp and thoughtful content since 2008. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, JJ. Doug, great to be talking some football with you tonight.
Likewise.
You know, one of my favorite things about you, Scott, is that you are a true polymath. You have an ability to pull facts about a wide range of topics at a moment's notice from your brain. Have you always had this ability?
That's kind of you to say. I mean, I'm interested in the things I'm interested in. It's like anything else. If you were super into gardening, you'd know everything about gardening. If you were, super into needlepoint or, raising huskies, whatever it is, everybody's got stuff that they're interested in. And for me, it's sports, it's fantasy sports, it's music, it's movies. So that stuff always kind of kicks to the front of my brain. If you need me to ask European capitals, I'm probably going to come up a little bit short. I'm a great trivia partner because I have specialized pockets of knowledge. There are plenty of things I don't know a lot about, but football is something I do know a little bit about. I played fantasy long enough to make every mistake there is and hopefully become a better player for it. And, hopefully we can translate some of that into a good conversation tonight.
One of the things that's so sad recently is that, to me, I'm losing so many icons from my youth. Michael Madsen passed away this month.
Oh, did he really? Oh, I'd missed that.
Oh, well, his movies were a staple of like my 20s. I mean, do you have any favorite films of Madsen?
I can never stop thinking of his role in Reservoir Dogs, even though it's not my favorite, close to my favorite Tarantino movie. But when I think of Michael Madsen, that's the first thing I think of.
I always think of him in Kill Bill. I mean, Reservoir Dogs is right there too. But what is your favorite Tarantino film?
I have kind of a different answer for this because Pulp Fiction is the most impressive movie I've ever seen. It's not my favorite movie, although it's very close to my favorite movie. It's probably in the top 5. But the Tarantino movie I always want to rewatch is Jackie Brown. So it's like Jackie Brown is kind of like my favorite, but I know that objectively Pulp Fiction is just a piece. It stands on its own. It's a unicorn. It's one of those one-of-ones.
Robert De Niro and Jackie Brown kills me every time. It is so different of a character that he plays. And that scene in the parking lot, just, I don't know. It always shocks me. It never fails.
Music is so good, which is a staple of most Tarantino movies. And also Robert Forster is just fabulous in the understated, I guess it's like a lead role, although it's really Pam Grier's movie, but Robert Forster has to knock his role out of the park. And what a run Tarantino was on. I mean, he revitalizes the Vincent Vega role for Travolta. His career had basically gone on life support, and you can't imagine anybody but John Travolta in that role now. And Robert Forster out of nowhere gets a different. It's not anywhere near as iconic, but an understated role that I really feel works well. And just even the little things of that movie, Michael Bowen and Michael Keaton as the cops. I really enjoy both of those guys. And the music is outstanding. Bridget Fonda has a nice role. It's just it's a long movie, but it doesn't feel like a long movie. I know it's probably like 240 in runtime, but
Is it really?
Jackie Brown's one of those movies. If I fall into it halfway through, I'm just going to watch it the rest of the night because, like a lot of people, I've collected movies and I still have a bunch of DVDs. But I have to accidentally stumble onto a movie on a streaming service or on cable before I watch it. I don't actually choose something from my wall. I don't even know where half my movies are, and if I open up the case, I'm not sure the movie would be in there. I have to fall into the movie randomly or have somebody text me and say, "Oh, Rounders just started, so I hope you're not doing anything for the next 2 hours."
Just watched that 2 nights ago.
So good.
So good. All right. Let's get back to football. Doug, is there anything the good people should know before we begin?
You kind of already teased on it. This week, we are talking about some rules to live by for the upcoming fantasy season. We will discuss anything from how to prioritize certain positions to how do we value certain players to anything in between. And I'm thrilled we get to do it with one of the best this industry has to offer in Scott.
Amen to that. Before we start, Jody Smith and the team at Full Time Fantasy have done the heavy lifting once again. The 36th edition of the Pro Forecast magazine has hit the presses. Packed with expert analysis, rankings, and draft strategies, it's your blueprint for dominating fantasy football in 2025. Be sure to tune in all summer long for your chance to win a free copy and crush your competition. All right, gentlemen, you're going to teach me how to win my redraft leagues this year. Scott, what is your first rule?
This is something I've cribbed off Michael Salfino from the work we do on the breakfast table. And I think Pat Fitzmaurice, one of my all-time favorites, doing great work over at Fantasy Pros, has made this point too. The most important league spec you need to know, but when you set up your draft strategy, is how many receivers do you start? And if you're starting 3 or more, I want you to dominate that position. I want you to have a wide receiver room that's the envy of the rest of the league. If you only start 2, that's a position you can be reactive on. You're going to be proactive if you need 3 or more, reactive if you need 2 or fewer. Any league that I set up is certainly going to be a 3 wide, and there'll be flexes where you can start that 4th or 5th receiver. But that setting will determine, it's a fork in the road. It's going to determine whether or not you prioritize a very important position.
I like that rule.
And I'll tell you, it's sad how long it took me to come to that realization, because I was always running back enthusiast, right? And that's the kind of the way we were raised in this industry. Mm-hmm. But I like to think of it now as the starting lineup requirements tell you what to prioritize. Mm-hmm. Just kind of like what you said, in just in a different way. If it's a 3 receiver group, guess what? You better start off with the receiver. Unless, if you think if you can predict the McCaffrey Barkley season, okay, then lead off with that guy. Otherwise, you're probably setting yourself up to fail if you wait until the 3rd round to get your first receiver, for example.
And a very important thing, many people in the industry have made this point, and probably more elegantly than I'm about to, is that, look, running back is gigantically important. We all know that, but it's very common for a running back who's not very well known or low on the depth chart, who during the season will ascend to a starting or a quasi-starting role. We can project that player for double-digit touches in that week, and we can start them not even all that sold on their talent necessarily, but if we can see the opportunity there, they become playable. And if the player actually has a little bit of ability, we may rank them in the top 12, the top 10, the top 5 if the situation is right. We saw last year when Breece Hall was hurt and Braylon Allen got a start. He had like 160 total yards or something like that. It's not that uncommon to pick up a running back off waivers who immediately becomes like your running back 2 or your running back 1 in the right situation. That is just so rare at wide receiver. I realized a couple of years ago, Puka Nacua emerged out of nowhere, had a monster first game. We all went to the waiver wire and emptied our budgets, and he was the real deal. He had an unusual career at college. He was hurt a lot. Obviously, it helped to be in the McVay offense. But the idea that you're going to find a waiver wire receiver who's going to be an impactful starter for you is just so unlikely, because at running back, opportunity is everything. At receiver, the degree of talent means a lot more. And it's not like, oh, Tyreek Hill got hurt. Who's to step in for Tyreek Hill in Miami? Receiver and running back work totally different when the teams have to replace players in the middle of the season.
That's great. Doug, do you have a first rule?
I do. It won't be as great as Scott's, but it'll be something. this one I'm sure you've heard already. If you don't draft one of the first 4 dual threat quarterbacks, those being Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, or Jalen Hurts, you might as well wait until the 7th round or later to pick your quarterback. What am I saying here? To put it as succinctly as possible, the dual threat quarterbacks typically provide managers a 20-point fantasy floor with even just a modest day passing. Most of your traditional quarterbacks need to throw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns just to get there. Put another way, over the course of the season, it took guys like Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield to throw for at least 4,500 yards and 40 plus touchdowns just to keep up. And each of those quarterbacks ran for more than 200 yards. Now, I don't want to bet on that kind of passing production happening year after year, even though both Burrow and Mayfield have the supporting cast to do it. But I don't want to bet on that kind of production year after year just to hang up the big dual threat boys. The quarterback is also as deep of a position as I can remember it being in a while. There are roughly 16 quarterbacks after the 4 I just mentioned who I feel are passable weekly starters at worst. That list doesn't include Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, or Trevor Lawrence. Beyond the depth of the position, we also have dual threats who probably haven't reached their upside yet. We got Kyler Murray at QB9, Caleb Williams at QB10, Justin Fields at QB11, and Drake May at QB18. That's their ADPs. Are examples of players who should be available after round 7. All of them have significant rushing floors, and I would say all of them can make a case to be a top 5 to 8 option at position at the end of this year.
All right. So if you don't get the top 4, you punt. When do you come back? Like, do you have like a target, like a range that you want to get?
Dr. Me or Scott?
You.
Yeah, I think Mayfield, from what I can see, Mayfield's going a little bit too early to qualify in the 7th round range. If he was to fall into that range, I would be all over Mayfield. But after that, I'm all about pairing up guys like, and I haven't looked at their schedule, I haven't compared their schedules yet, but I'd be thrilled with pairing up Williams with Fields, for example. Andrew Cooper over Fantasy Alarm and on Sirius XM, he talks about yin and yang tight ends. I think you could almost yin and yang quarterbacks, especially with the depth of the position.
Yeah, I find myself like in the Scott Fish Bowl, I went QB early in the 1st and 3rd. And I did regret it, although I'm happy with who I got, because as we hit the 8th round and they're still taking good quarterbacks, I was like, man, I really missed an opportunity there, I thought. Scott, what do you think about drafting QBs?
Yeah, I agree with Doug. The depth of the position is a staggering number of players you can be happy with. I've made this comp in previous seasons, and I think it applies this year. The quarterback pool is the public transit system in New York. You miss a train? Okay. There's another train coming in 5 minutes. Nothing to worry about here. There are a bunch of different ways to get to Times Square. And so if you don't get, obviously we know the Allen and Jackson and Daniels and Hurts, we know what they do, and it's different than what the rest of the pool does. But you can tell yourself a story for so many quarterbacks outside the top 10 that could be top 5, top 8, top 12, regular weekly starters. And even some of the guys outside the top 20, what if Bryce Young keeps any of that surprising rushing production he had late last season? He did improve as a passer. They drafted him a receiver in the 1st round. It looks like Canales is a right answer as the head coach and play designer in Carolina. It's just so nice to see Bryce Young get coached intelligently after he had to live with that carnival, just that ugly mess, that banana convention they had in his rookie year. And funny how his career arc totally flips with CJ Stroud after a year where Stroud was the right answer and Young was the wrong answer. And then they both moved in different directions last year. Lawrence with Liam Cohen, with Travis Hunter. We know Brian Thomas Jr. is always open. And Lawrence is another guy who might run for 3 to 5 touchdowns. May, you mentioned Doug, I think he's quarterback 18 right now in ADP, but with McDaniels there, if they get anything out of Diggs, I'm optimistic that maybe Kyle Williams is finally a Patriot receiver they drafted who might actually be able to play football. They haven't hit on that position for so many years, it feels like. But there's only maybe 5 or 6 quarterbacks I don't want to go near, right? Probably the New Orleans situation I'll ignore. I don't think anybody's all that excited in Indianapolis, although they may be better off with Daniel Jones than Anthony Richardson, which is a comment on Richardson. I am a believer in and Justin Fields, because I think he's going to run for 1,000 yards. And look, he had 2 years with Garrett Wilson at Ohio State. That's not nothing, right? They already know each other. They already have some familiarity. I realize that wide receiver room is pretty thin after Wilson, but we have to mind the gap of the Konami code, as Rich Rebar would say, of how scoring is for quarterbacks. There's so many right answers here. And you tell people who are new to fantasy, this is the dichotomy of fantasy to real life football. In NFL, the quarterback is everything. If you don't have a quarterback, you're nothing. You don't have a future as a team. I mean, once a generation, there may be like the Baltimore Ravens that won a championship with Trent Dilfer basically being a game manager, but that's such a rare thing. And in fantasy, quarterback is, you could argue, the least important position of the four more main positions. Certainly not as important as running back. I don't think it's as important as wide receiver. People may have different ideas about the tight end. It's another onesie position like quarterback in most leagues. But unlike the NFL, where, man, you got to have a quarterback, your whole day and night and sleeping is made up of thinking about your quarterback, dreaming about your quarterback, planning about your quarterback, worrying about your quarterback. Fantasy managers do not have to be wired that way.
And JJ, the only other thing I'll add is I think it's been statistically proven by people who dig into the analytics and stats more than I do, that it's very rare that a quarterback season will be the determining factor as to who wins the league title and who doesn't. I mean, you do have your Lamar Jackson MVP years, you do have those, but it's very few and far between where a quarterback so outperforms to his brethren that it ends up making a huge difference in who wins the fantasy title or not.
One other thing to remember too, I remember a long time ago, Bill Simmons had this idea that draft all these good quarterbacks, everybody will have to trade with you. Nobody in your league is ever going to feel like they're stuck at quarterback. So if you hit on one of those later guys and you also drafted Lamar Jackson or something like that, good luck trying to trade the surprise player to one of the other teams in your league, because nobody is going to feel like they're stuck. Everybody's going to feel like, okay, I drafted a good player. Maybe I drafted a good backup. Maybe I'll add somebody who nobody drafted who's had a couple of good weeks, whatever it is. It's a position where people never feel stressed. They never feel harried.
Our friend Floyd says that savvy drafters should be able to win even with the QB 22 through 24 this year. Yeah, I have to agree with you. All right, Scott, let's go back to you. What is your next rule?
Okay, this is more of a theoretical idea, but people say when people go into a draft room, hopefully a Yahoo draft room, you can customize the rankings as you see them if you want to. And I always think that's a mistake, because I want to be looking at what my opponents are looking at. So my tip is going to be, do not customize the rankings. You want to have that draft applet set up the way your opponents do. Of course, you want to add to your queue. You want something to cover you if you get bumped offline. You want certain hot button players to be percolating towards the top of your mind. Maybe you have a piece of scrap paper. I know at the King's Classic, I'll have a piece of scrap paper scribbling down notes to myself or late names to remember. But I think it's a mistake to input your own set of rankings into a draft applet, because you want to know who is the top 3, 4, 5 names on my opponent's list. Who are they going to see even by accident as they get ready to make their next pick? It will help you make better decisions. So I think I'm a big believer in, if you're really computer savvy, if you're really good with the keyboard, you could maybe maintain a list offline out of the draft room. But I think it's a mistake to actually change the rankings. You want to know what your opponents are looking at.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Sean Teague says that's a great tip. I never really thought about it that way before. I know I try to be aware of ADP, but I tend to use my own rankings. Doug, do you leave the site's rankings as is?
This one's so good, because here's what I'll do. On the platforms I play on, I can usually queue up about 40 players. So what I'll do before the draft is I'll fill that queue as much as I can with with how I rank the players, right? But I have that off to the side just for the reasons Scott mentioned. Because ultimately what people are going to do is people that aren't as confident in their rankings or just aren't confident in general are going to lean toward what the herd thinks, what the consensus thinks. And so if they find themselves in that final 10 seconds, I don't know, QB, okay, well, there's Joe Burrow. I know he'll put up a lot of points. Might be the third round, it might be the sixth round, I don't know, but they're going some of your some of your managers, doesn't matter what the stakes are, could be a free league, can be $1,000 league. They are going to cave into what the consensus thinks on occasion, and that's a valuable weapon to have, because I know I don't think like the consensus. I go by my rankings, but I always want to have a good grasp on what they might be thinking. So I really like this one.
Yeah, and if you're not drafting against high level competition, they generally won't scroll down too far, or else they're going to start feeling bad about how far they're going away, and start questioning whether or not they're making the right decision. Because if the guy you're about to pick is 3 screens down,
yeah,
well, maybe he's not as good as I think he is. So I like that it, I don't know, plays on the insecurities of other players. That's like next level game theory. I like that. Doug, what is your next rule?
So I went by position with my 4 rules here, and so I'm moving on to running back. And I'm going to tell drafters out there, pound the running back position beginning around round 8 or round 9. Now, I'm not endorsing the idea of avoiding running back in the early rounds. I definitely want to come out of the first 7 rounds with at least 2. However, we see quality starters, perhaps even future RB1s such as Chuba Hubbard or Bucky Irving, come out of the double-digit rounds. I think there's a real chance of that happening on a wider scale this year. Part of the reason I feel that way is because the quality of the rookies that joined the fray this spring, which tends to create values because it pushes some quality veterans back a bit. Among the players I like that are typically going in the 10th round or after include, and this will not surprise JJ, Jordan Mason, Tyjae Spears, J.K. Dobbins, Trey Benson, and Jalen Wright. I'm not going to talk about all of them, in part because I've already talked about so much about Mason and Benson. I just want to give a short summation about the other 3. Spears should be at worst a 1B back in an offense that figures to be facing negative game script a fair amount this season. With that said, Spears is so electric that he doesn't need a lot of opportunities to make a dent in fantasy box score. To that end, he was only featured in 1 game all of last season and still managed to finish as the overall RB5 during the fantasy playoffs. As far as J.K. Dobbins, he's not Mark Ingram, and R.J. Harvey is not Alvin Kamara, but I think it is realistic to expect Dobbins to assume Ingram's early down role in this offense as long as he can stay healthy. I'd be stunned if he's not a weekly flex option. And then I think we may have been a year too early on Jalen Wright. It was probably not the greatest idea to assume Wright would just eventually nudge out Raheem Mostert 1 year after he set franchise touchdown records. But Mostert's no longer around, and Miami appears to have improved its interior line play. Let's also not assume that Devon Achane can hold up as well as he did last season, durability-wise. Dolphins do not figure to be all that good this year, but we do want pieces of that offense. And again, if it won't take much. I think Wright will probably be a low-end flex, regardless of what happens. And then if you have the huge contingent upside if Achane does get hurt.
Do you have any concerns about Ollie Gordon in that offense?
I do not. I think he might come in, get the occasional goal line plunge, but I think as far as the running game is concerned, it's going to be let's call it 55% Achane, 35% Wright, and 10% Gordon, something along those lines.
All right, Sean thinks that you are right about Jalen. That's cringe, but I appreciate cringe. Scott, what do you think about what Doug said?
It's funny when he was queuing up the names he was going to list. The first name that popped into my mind was Jordan Mason. He's one of my favorite targets, and yeah, I'm on base with a lot of what he said, and it actually is going to tie into the next thing I'm going to mention. So I'll kind of weave these in together. One of my big concepts that I've run with for a few years is this idea of the running back handcuff. We call them like contingent backups over at Yahoo, and I think there's a time of the year where I want those guys, maybe the middle of the year or later in the season when my winning scenario is more defined. I compare it to bunting in baseball. Bunting in Major League Baseball is almost always wrong in the early innings. You want to play for the big inning. But in the end of the game, where you might need 1 run to win a game, bunting could be right. If your specialized situation is get 1 run, walk off the field, you win. So to me, the handcuff back is bunting in the early innings when you draft them. You want to get as much upside as possible. So what you want to do, somebody else in your league is Aaron Jones, you be the guy who has Jordan Mason. Now, if I have Aaron Jones, I'm probably not going to draft Jordan Mason because I'm playing for the small inning. I want to play for the big inning. I want to play like all my running backs are potentially right answers. So I want you at your draft to, yes, take these high upside contingency backups, but not of the guys you've already rostered. Draft like the picks you made early on were right, and give yourself more upside, more of a chance for that big inning. Also, a lot of times we don't know. We do know with Mason in Minnesota, but some of these teams we don't know who the backup is, who would be the feature guy if there was an injury. Maybe somebody can jump somebody on the depth chart. That's a conversation. That's a fill I may look for in the middle of the season when my winning scenario is much more specific. Early part of the draft, I want the big inning. So I'm going to take those contingency backups not tied to my starters and try to ghoul everybody else in my league. Now, I think it's a mistake to draft. You should draft because you help yourself. You should not draft because you're trying to necessarily screw your neighbor, so to speak. But in this case, again, they took Aaron Jones. I want you to be the Jordan Mason guy. But if you're the Aaron Jones guy, I do not want you to be the Jordan Mason guy. I want you to diversify. I want you to play for the biggest inning possible.
I like that.
I would say the only exception I can think of is when I won't say the system has proven, but when I'm looking at Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
If you have McCaffrey, then by all means, I won't say reach on Garendo, but I'll say try to ensure that you have Garendo and Jordan James just to make sure you're locked away there. Because
I would concede if there's a perfect storm where the upside is enormous, we know who the backup is, and it can be that tilting. I think of meaning not tilting like emotionally distressing, but more like you can tilt the league in your favor.
Right.
I recently did a piece of the 25 best fantasy players of the last 25 years for Yahoo.
Yep.
And I shoehorned in Priest Holmes and Larry Johnson together. I kind of cheated, made them an entry. The year that Holmes got hurt and Johnson made 9 starts, everybody I knew, maybe I don't know enough people, but everybody I knew who had Larry Johnson won their league because Johnson just went ballistic. And that was the case where we knew the system was great. We knew that Johnson was the unequivocal starter. If something happened to Holmes, we knew Johnson could play. He was a first-round pick. He'd already shown explosive ability. And as soon as, not that anybody wants injury on anybody, but as soon as Holmes got hurt, it's like, here we go with Larry Johnson. And he had the 9 best fantasy game run I've ever seen. It tracked to like a 3,000-yard season in a full. In fact, Larry Johnson somehow went over 2,000 yards twice in his career. Otherwise, never went over 1,000 yards. That's why I couldn't give him his own slot on this top 25. But that speaks to what Doug was kind of hinting around with San Francisco, that if you have a clearly defined backup and if the upside is the moon, I'll allow it. I don't think most teams fall into that category, but I'm willing to make an exception if you think the upside is that great and the situation is that specific, is that defined. We know who the guy is. Most teams don't fall into that category, but I will allow that exception if the specifics are right.
Hey, Scott, I wanted to tell a quick story about the Priest Holmes Larry Johnson season.
Mm-hmm.
That particular year, I don't know if I made a mistake, but I think I went Priest Holmes first round. And I want to say Larry Johnson 6th round. That part isn't important. The important part is I started out 0-5 in that league. Priest Holmes gets hurt because it must have been about week 5 that he got hurt. Larry Johnson takes over. I think I lost 1 game the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. It's just the how that tilted the league, how that tilted my team. It was that's something I'll probably never forget during my fantasy football career.
Did you win your league?
I did, yes.
See, everybody I know who had Larry Johnson that year won their league. You have not disproven my theory that everybody who had Larry Johnson won their league that year.
Started out 0-5, come back to win the league. Because
what's more satisfying than that, right? When you're left for dead. It just goes to show you, just stay the course, just be dangerous, get into the playoffs. You don't have to have the best team. You don't have to have the best record. You don't have to have a first-round bye. You just have to get hot at the right time and have the right 1 or 2 breaks, and you can win your fantasy football league.
This is some great stuff. I wish I would have had this before I started 2 other drafts this weekend. Scott, what is your next rule?
Well, I just went with the handcuff one, but I can give you another one if you want.
Sure.
So this is, again, a Yahoo tip. Probably applies in other leagues too. If you're unsure who the best player is, okay, in the middle of your draft, if your queue gets a little bit screwed up, go to the main part of the Yahoo site and look at the player pool and start sorting by the best players who are unrostered and what their roster tags are. And a lot of times that will steer you to the right pick to make, because you can't see those roster tags in the draft applet, but you can go to the main page and see it. So a lot of times I'll go there if I'm unsure of what to do. I'll trust the wisdom of the crowds, and I'll see who the most commonly rostered are players who haven't been selected yet.
It's a good idea. Doug, what do you think about that?
I do that. I'm in the middle of a startup, and I don't use it so much to determine what my next pick is, but I'm always trying to think of the next round or two, who may still be there for the next few, round or two. And I think I like what you're saying there, because that's something I do, like I said, during my startup dynasty draft, is just, okay, what are the chances that an 89% owned player X is going to make it to me in the 15th round, that type of thing. But I don't use that so much in part because I guess I'm usually pretty much locked into the draft room, but I'm not going to deny the wisdom of that. So again, good point, Scott.
So I love the wisdom of crowds. This is something I do for fantasy baseball. Okay. Sunday is my bid day for fantasy baseball. And I have a bid in my hometown league that goes live at 6:00, and the Tout Wars bidding is 8:00, and the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, which is basically the baseball's version of the Fishbowl, is 10:00. And then Labor, the great league that Steve Gardner runs, is 12:00. So 6:00, 8:00, 10:00, 12:00. So how do I make all these bids? After I make my bids at 6:00, I go to the results and I look at who I got. Of course, it's the first thing you look at. You open up your Christmas presents. But I see who I didn't get. I see who was cut. I see what other players did teams bid on, what other players did teams bid on that they didn't get. And in that specifically, you can make first come, first serve moves after all the bids are processed at 6:00. So I'm always there, if I can be, at 6, and try to, if I didn't get my guy, who's available, and who are the smarter owners in my league, smarter managers in my league? Who did they bid on? How can I tell anything from their bidding strategy, from their sizing of their bids? Did they not get a certain player who's available who I might be interested in? And I'll take that intel I gain at 6:00 and I'll apply it at 8:00, and I'll do the same thing at 8:00, and I'll take the stuff I learned at 8:00 and apply it at 10:00, apply it at 12:00. A million years ago, when I was working for John Hansen, I wrote an article about what to do when you're in too many leagues. And one thing was to appreciate leagues that are parallel in structure. They're about the same size, maybe about the same player penetration level. And if somebody's added or dropped in a league of the similar size to another league, that stuff translates league over league. So you want to take, and also, especially once we get into bye week season, that's when people start cutting players they don't want to because they're desperate. Injuries have really hit. And that's why I don't like to draft into injuries preseason. I'm not the injury optimist, because I hear 4 to 6 weeks. To me, it's like 6 to 8 weeks. And maybe we need a prove it week before we even play that player. Injuries are going to find you. I'm generally not going to draft proactively into players who are already hurt in August past something that's obviously something really minor. But you want to appreciate leagues that are parallel in structure and take what you learn from League A, because it might apply directly to League B.
This one's so good. So I don't have the layered leagues like you do for baseball here, but I love your advice for leagues where you do have them layered like that. But what I tend to do with my waiver claims is I try to take that information from week to week. So sometimes they'll tell me, and that tells me a couple things. It tells me maybe the profile of the players are looking for, the positions that they're going after. And then let's say that we all have a high dollar bid on somebody. Last year, Cedric Tillman comes to mind around, what was it, week 8, week 9? Okay. Now, I was fortunate enough to get him in pretty much every league that I bid on. But there was an ample number of managers in each of the leagues that were bidding. Maybe I bid $80 and someone bid 50, or another person bid 35. That tells me who I need to be offering my trades to. If I have a surplus of position now because of Tillman, that tells me who I need to be offering trades to. Maybe they'll give me an RB3, a handcuff, or a tight end that I can, a bye week tight end, something along those lines. Now, Tillman would have been worth more than that, but my point remains the same: is I love it because you can, the leagues I play in, you can see who had the losing bids. Right. So use that information for your greater good, for your purpose.
Great information. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like we're playing poker. I sit down to a poker table. I don't know anybody. I'm looking around. The first thing I'm looking at is how many chips does everybody have? I'm looking at how are the chips arranged? Are they neatly stacked? Are they kind of haphazardly stacked? Is the person dressed a certain way? Is the person drinking? Is the person paying attention when they're not in the hand? All these things. Does the person seem emotionally high or low? Stuff like that. What are there any patterns to their betting? You know, are there any betting patterns, just like bidding patterns? And you know, what Doug was just outlining is use every piece of information you can. And sometimes it's really subtle things like who came in second or third on a bid. And whenever you talk trade, one of my favorite trade tips is that you go to somebody and maybe they have a receiver, maybe they have, I don't know, maybe Puka Nacua is off to a poor start and you want to get Puka Nacua. I don't go to that person and say, hey, you know, Puka's not playing well, trade him to me. I'll say, it looks like you have a pretty deep receiver room. Can you rank those guys for me? And who knows? Maybe he ranks Puka as his number 2. Maybe he elevates the receiver he took around later as higher than Nacua now. You don't have to agree with their rankings. If there are things that you can exploit or you can work on for an advantage, that's great. But it builds a conversation. It gives you an understanding of what their objectives are. Because when you make trades, the idea is not to rip somebody off and then laugh the rest of your life. Is you want to trade with this person for the next 10 years. So I want to be open and accessible. And I want to come to a consensus, get people to agree on something. If somebody doesn't want to trade a player, say, oh, I understand why you wouldn't want to trade him. He's such a talented player. I wouldn't want to trade him either. Just agree on anything, come to some point that you can carry along parallel. And that's one of my favorite tips is you're just trying to gather information. So when I'm talking trade, a lot of times I'll ask my opponent to give me a depth chart just so I can work on what their expectations are, where they think they're deep, where they think they're shallow. And sometimes it helps you come to a consensus on a reasonable swap.
Yeah, that's great information. And everything you said about poker so applies to your conversation with Drew Davenport about auctions, right? Drew always talks about auctions and how you have to pay attention to what everybody is doing, because people will tell you what they're going to do well before they actually do it.
That's the great thing about auctions too, JJ, is like, if we're in a draft together, I pick second, you pick 11th. It's almost like we're not in the same room. Your decisions are almost never going to impact my decisions and vice versa. But in the auction, or we call it in Yahoo salary cap format, you have to be accountable for everybody. You have to have a sense of what everybody's up to, who's got leverage, who's got a certain bidding style, who's nominating players they want, who's nominating players they don't want, who's mixing it up, what the cadence is. Last year we had these really professional auctioneers were at the Kings Classic. It took me like maybe 10 or 15 minutes just to get past the fact that they were so good at it that it was a little bit mesmerizing. You're sitting there just admiring their craft when you're supposed to be crunching your ideas on players. So it took me a little while just to kind of get in the flow of that, although nobody ever has to apologize for being great at what they do. And man, did they hire a couple of people who are great at it. But yeah, all the poker elements. And that's all the more reason, by the way, you should be listening to Drew Davenport, who does two things that nobody else I know does. One, the regular auction content, which is fantastic. And also, as I think everybody who knows Drew knows, he's a lawyer by trade. He gives very detailed, smart, insightful takes on the legal process whenever it comes into the NFL. Obviously, that's a very nebulous thing. It can be hard to know how to handle players who are facing possible sanctions by the league. And whenever I need to get my head straight or get some clarity on a player situation, knowing that, Drew is still an outsider like the rest of us. He's not an agent. He doesn't know these players personally, but I'll tell you what, he gives me good advice and he gives everybody great advice on the regular because he does this for a living and he's always measured. He just tells you what he knows and which way he thinks things are going. We were talking before the show started. One of the best things he told me last year, I didn't get to take advantage of it, but he was very confident Rashee Rice would not be suspended last year. Now, of course, Rice wasn't suspended, but he was hurt. But he steered me to a Rice value pick, which I thought was one of the right answers of the season before Rice got hurt. That's a case of Drew giving the right information and just being unlucky because an injury popped up. But anytime one of your players is facing some legal issues, man, Drew Davenport, you're going to have him on speed dial.
Amen to that. Doug, what is your next rule?
My third rule, invest in Colts receivers this year. No, this is not a Daniel Jones tweet, but this is a Colts receiver tweet, okay? I'm unapologetically a fan of Josh Downs for fantasy purposes, but I have my reasons. you realize that even with a half a season with Anthony Richardson as his quarterback, Downs was on pace to finish as a top 20 receiver if he had played all 17 games? His 17-game numbers with the combination of Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson were almost identical to Tyreek Hill's last year. Taking one step further, and I note this in my most recent article at FF Today, Downs' 17-game pace with Joe Flacco as his quarterback last year would have been, you'll like this, 119 catches for 1,103 yards and 5 touchdowns. If you need some context, that's essentially what Jackson Smith and Jigba did last year, plus 20 catches. No one here is going to tell you that Joe Flacco or presumed starter Daniel Jones are the same guy, but I think we can both agree they are both competent in terms of accuracy. Richardson has not been that guy. Furthermore, we have seen how often Jones throws to his slot receivers. During his Giants career, it was Sterling Shepard, Richie James, and Wan'Dale Robinson. They all enjoyed some of their best years with Daniel Jones running the show. I'm going to say about the only case I can make against Downs is about the only case that can be made against Downs is that he's not a full-time player. My counter to that would be that his 23.9% target share tied George Pickens for the 16th highest mark in the league last year, while his .30 targets per route run ranked 8th among players who played at least 10 games. When he's on the field, he is treated like an alpha. He's usually going off the board around pick 100. I'm going to make a slight, very much shorter case for Michael Pittman. He played with a fractured back last season and still got about 69 catches, 808 yards, and on 111 targets on his way to a wide receiver 41 finish. In the 3 previous seasons, he averaged 98 catches, 1,053 yards, and a wide receiver 17 finish. Now, I'm not going to tell you that production or finish is possible now with Downs as good as he is and Tyler Warren about to enter the fray, but I would definitely take him over Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Golden, and Ricky Pearsall, all players who are going at least a round or two ahead of him.
The chat all agrees with you. They're talking about Michael Pittman and how cheap he is. Vince is drafting a lot of Downs and Pittman and Danny Dimes late. Scott, where are you on the Colts?
Yeah, Anthony Richardson, he played so little at Florida. He's been so inconsistent in the NFL. Obviously, injuries have been part of that, but you need to – I realize he's hit a lot of splash plays, but an offense needs to have octane. It needs to matriculate the ball down the field. It needs to turn over the downs. It needs to give its defense a chance to rest, and he just shouldn't be a starting quarterback in the NFL right now. And I realize Jones had it ups and downs in New York, and he was basically run out of town, but kind of a losing hand. He also was injured at times. He does have some mobility. He won't run as proactively as Richardson did. Where I am not sure how to address the Colts is I don't know if Shane Steichen, who was obviously his fingerprints were all over Philadelphia's success when he was there, and then he goes to the Colts, and we were talking about him the way we're talking about Liam Cohen now, the way we're talking about Ben Johnson now. I mentioned Canales earlier, who had a really high rep when he went to Carolina, and then of course Tampa Bay was better with Liam Cohen last year. But is Shane Steichen the right answer or not? I'm still kind of going back and forth on that, but I do think this offense can stay on schedule and be more efficient with Jones. I don't think that's a big hurdle to clear, a big bar to leap over because Richardson played so poorly. But I think Doug makes it interesting. I have not been as proactive towards Downs and Pittman as maybe I should. And I think I haven't applied how I feel about Jones into maybe the appropriate ranking for these Colts receivers. So after this blurb from Doug, I think I'm going to go and look at where I have the indie guys and be open-minded to maybe pushing them up a half round or a round, because I think he lays out an interesting case.
All right. Scott.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
No, and let's be clear. This is as much about where you could get them as it is. I mean, if we're talking about both of these guys in wide receiver 2 land, I'd be saying, okay, play it cool. You're getting both of these guys as low end wide receiver 3s, high end wide receiver 4s. At that rate, you do have 80 catch potential with both of these guys. So you do love 80 plus catch potential with your wide receiver 3s and wide receiver 4s. That's all I wanted to add.
Sean Teague says that Steichen might give Mike McDaniel and Brian Daboll a run as the first head coach fired this year. It's a possibility. It's always a possibility.
How are we feeling about McDaniel? A stat, I realize Tua was hurt decent chunk of the year, and maybe Tyreek Hill wasn't right for a decent chunk of the year either. But this is a stat I can't unsee. After week 1, Tyreek Hill never had a catch over 30 yards. This is Tyreek freaking Hill, the ultimate field stretcher. I think a walk-in Hall of Famer, a player who was making a push for Offensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, and maybe a 2,000-yard season. Where are we at on McDaniel? Where are we at on the Miami passing game? Where are we at on Tyreek Hill right now?
I found it interesting that the news blurbs that were going around yesterday and today about Tyreek were all about him repairing his relationship with his teammates. So I wonder what happened last season that was beyond what we saw on the field that might have caused his performance to dip.
Yeah.
But they definitely started to go to Jonnu and just short game. And
who saw that coming, right? The Jonnu Smith offense takeover, right? And now, of course, Jonnu Smith isn't even there anymore. And an offense with Waddle, an offense with Achane, an offense with Tyreek Hill, it became the Jonnu Smith show. And it was glorious. Jonnu Smith was one of the most, a right answer that you might have gotten off waivers in the middle of the season.
Yeah, so I don't know. Doug, where are you on the entire offense?
Well, I'm buying into the offense in so much. I think the defense and specifically the secondary is going to be atrocious. Okay. I don't see any way that that secondary is not going to be.
So some carnival potential. Maybe they could be like the Bengals last year.
Yeah. A lot of it hinges on Tua's health. I mean, different year, same song. But I'm working my way through Miami's projections as we speak. And I'm trying to keep track of the win-loss count as I'm going along too. I think the best I'm going to have them go is like 6-11, 5-12, something like that. So we're looking at a negative game script. To your point about Tyreek Hill, I don't know how much he was talking. I guess he was talking to his dad here recently, and he said, "I wonder what it'd be like if I would just focus on football for once in my life and not have all this other noise." And so we're talking about a guy in year 10, who, by all accounts, is maybe trying to be a leader, maybe trying to be a good soldier for the first time in years since his Kansas City days. I do want to chalk up most of what happened last year to the wrist, and you can say his separation metrics weren't what they were years past, and so on and so forth. You don't, and I've talked on this pod before about he was in the process of a failed marriage. The divorce wasn't official until this offseason, but I'm sure that stuff couldn't have played well on him, or couldn't have helped him in any regard. He had the traffic incident, the well-known traffic incident, and then, like JJ said, who knows what else happened off the field? Maybe, and then he certainly didn't help his cause at the end of the season when he said, "I'm out," and basically quit on the team. So, yeah. And I think you mentioned this too. I can address a little bit as to why it became the Jonnu Smith show, and it's not a surprise. The teams went very heavy on the two deep safeties, cover 2 look. But most offensive coordinators with that kind of wide receiver talent can figure out how to break cover 2. It doesn't. Not everything has to be a fly or a post or a corner. You can run drag routes and deeper intermediate routes and break cover 2 if you want to. So I'm not sure why it was always Jonnu and Achane who were benefiting, and Tyreek Hill and Waddle became secondary players. I think that changes this year. So to your point, I'm buying the offense, but not for the reasons in so much as they're just going to steamroll the competition. I think that I'm buying into them because I think that they're going to face that much negative game script.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about the offensive line, Scott. It definitely has not gotten better. And when you have a quarterback who has a propensity for injury, I don't want to say he's injury prone. Maybe that way sounds a little nicer. But it scares me when an offensive line is as poor as it is. Hill is a great player, but sometimes you have to give him a little bit more time to get deep because he likes that long, crossing the field at like 15 yards to run away from all the safeties and coverage. And I don't think they had that amount of time to get that to him. So hopefully McDaniel's been in the offensive lab all off season and has come up with a few new wrinkles. But if he hasn't, I would be a little bit nervous about his longevity.
I'm also concerned they could be the fourth best team in the division, or maybe the third best team, depending on how you feel about the Patriots and Jets. And where's Tyreek Hill's head going to be at if they start off 1-4 or 2-5 or something like that? Is there some off the reservation risk where is Tyreek Hill demanding a trade around Halloween or, around the World Series or something like that? I can't say that's a non-zero chance. It's not. Bottom line is when Tyreek Hill is the right pick in my draft so far, and it's still the majority of my draft season is to come. But when I've gotten to that point where it's like Tyreek Hill or the other guy, I've been taking the other guy.
As have I.
Yeah.
As have I. All right, Scott. What is your final draft rule?
Yeah. Strict static rankings are not enough. You have to appreciate where the teardrops are, where talent clusters and where talent drops off. And this allows you to know when you're facing a couple of positions of need. Okay, it's really simple. You go to the grocery store. It's like, okay, they have 5 or 6 of this thing. They have one of this thing, and I need both of them. I can only afford one. I guess I'm talking about college age, grocery store shopping because I can afford everything I want at the grocery store now. I'm a big market club, not missing many meals. But, it's where can I wait? Where do I have to be proactive? And again, going over to the salary cap or auction format, it's imperative that you get your stuff when your opponents have options. Because if your opponents don't have options and you're all backed into a corner over the last good tight end or the last starting running back or the last receiver in a tier, that's when the panic buying kicks in. And that's when it's basically the night before a hurricane and everybody wants, their bathroom tissue and everybody wants the last bottle of milk and all that stuff. So you have to try to get in when your opponents have a chance to say, no, okay, I don't have to have this player because I have alternatives. So appreciate where talent clusters, appreciate where talent drops off, appreciate the tiers in your rankings.
Doug, you do tiers, right?
I do. It's a different way of doing tiers, but so I wouldn't call what I have static rankings, but within my big board, I will note the tiers. So let's say that there's eight guys in tier 3. So it might be 4 running backs, 2 tight ends, and a quarterback and receiver, whatever. So depending on what start I have, I can easily look down to I color the tiers. I color the position, the fantasy position. I won't go into chapter and verse on that, but my point being is I easily identify what positions and how many of them are in the next tier before the next tier break. And so here again, I'm in lockstep with Scott. I just wanted to note impressive grocery store flex by you. So you can afford everything in the store. So
Vince notes he's not allowed in a supermarket anymore. But that's in Australia. I don't know if they have different rules down there. Doug, before we get to your final rule,
yes.
Sean Teague asks or states that he sees a lot of people stacking QBs and wide receivers in redraft leagues. Now, I know stacking was big in the big ball, best ball community. Are you doing that in redraft leagues, Scott?
We talked about this a little bit on the breakfast table last week, and I think that the more competitive and difficult it is to win your league, the more likely I'm going to be favorable towards stacking because that gives you a more simplistic, I only need a couple of things to go right, and I can blow up point-wise and win my league. I want the simplest scenario where if I get A, B, and C, I'm good. Or I'm probably good. If I'm in a league where it's a work league, it's more casual, not everybody is a diehard NFL fan, not everybody is making bids every week, I think you beat those people just by making plus EV decisions, and you don't necessarily have to correlate your guys and play some of the 3D chess. But if my league's more competitive, if I'm trying to win an overall of a big contest, then I think correlated scoring is very important.
Doug?
Yeah, I'm again in lockstep with Scott here. What I would say is that if I played more tournaments, I would say I would be a fan of stacking more often if I played more tournaments. As it is in redraft leagues, I'll do it. I won't look out for it necessarily, and I'll just. But we know JJ and I were part of the Scott Fishbowl in Boston this past weekend. Did not intend on going Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts 1-2. Okay, did not intend on doing that. It's the way what came to me. They were two of my top 7 players. But beyond that, somehow I lucked into AJ Brown and Devonta Smith in what rounds 4 and 7, something like that. So I guess now I have the triple stack. I was not shooting for that, but Scott Fishbowl being kind of the tournament that it is, it makes perfect sense now that it's week 16, week 17, and that's the week that Jalen Hurts decides to throw for 4 touchdowns and run for 2. I've got a huge advantage over the rest of the field. So anyway, in tournaments, I would support it more. I'm looking for it a little bit more in redraft, and even in high stakes, I'm not so much seeking it out. If it happens, it's a happy coincidence, but I'm not so much seeking it.
Okay. Next question. Do we think that considering the health and success of RBs last season, we'll see them be prioritized and or overdrafted this season?
You want to take this one first, Scott, or you want to go?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I mean, that was one of the stories of the year last year, is that so many veteran running backs stayed healthy. So many of the guys got out of a bad situation to a good, Barkley goes from the Giants to the Eagles, and Jacobs goes from the Raiders to the Packers, and Henry goes from the Titans to the Ravens. Just guys landing and on their back nines. This should be the downsides of their career, and they all had monster seasons. There's no way the injury rate, I can see that repeating league wide year over year. It's just very unlikely to do. I have seen. I think the market's slightly adjusted. I don't think it's been an overcorrection. I would say that however you viewed running back strategy before last season, I would basically apply that same strategy to 2025. That would be my overall takeaway.
Doug?
Yeah, I think we'll find that last year was definitely the exception to the rule, as far as if we look at it over a 10-year, if we take the look from a 10-year view kind of thing. I think we'll look back at 2024 as being, oh, wow, this was the year of the running back because the other 8 were not. All I'll say here is I think as we get closer to more and more drafts, I think you're going to see more of a push on, and I'm not saying I recommend it, but I think you're see more of a push of getting like a basically a 1-to-1 split of running backs and receivers in that first round. You might get a Brock Bowers in the first round there. I'm not sure I would advocate that, but my point being is I think in probably the last 4 or 5 years, you've been looking at 8-9 receivers in the first round. I think it's going to be more like 6 or 7, and it's going to push the guys like Henry, Achane, those guys. It's going to push them in the second round when they probably shouldn't be there. But I think there'll end up being a small correction. But having said that, I think that this season, so whatever season you're in, this season's rankings, this season's drafting is almost a reflection of last year's results. And if you look at almost anybody's rankings, it's almost 8 or 9 people from that did well last year or in the first round of the next year's draft. So I think, again, I think there'll be a small correction. I'm not sure when I say correction, I'm not sure it's the right thing, but I'm sure there'll be a small correction in that regard.
So Doug, I know the answer is always it depends, but there are basically 3 different paths you can go with your early running back build. You can go robust RB, where you're attacking it multiple times. You can go hero RB or anchor RB, where you're getting that one guy, but focusing on other positions otherwise. And then there's a zero RB, where you're not going to take a vanity running back and backfill it. When the season is over, when we're at week 1, gloriously trying to figure out who we have and who we don't have, which of the backfield blueprints do you think you'll be tapping on the most?
Yeah, I've found, and again, it depends, but in a vacuum, I'm going to probably go hero RB. And I'm not a big fan of those labels, but my point being is I want to remain as fluid and flexible for as long as possible. So if we're talking before, earlier in the show about 3 receiver leagues versus 2 receiver leagues, okay, that's part of what depends. But I'm mostly in 3 wide receiver leagues. So in that first round, barring a running back that I think is going a league winner type, a McCaffrey, a Barkley, even though I'm not going to be high on Barkley this year. But my point being is if there's a league winner running back in the first round, I might go that way. But in that second round, I'm almost certainly going receiver because, again, that allows me to stay flexible and take care, scoop up value, as they would say, scoop up value for as long as possible. So.
Yeah, it's probably going to be my common build too. And again, I'm so glad you mentioned staying flexible, right? No matter what your strategy is, right? Don't box yourself in. The only time you box yourself in is if you have the first pick, then you can make that pick ahead of time. But you never know. I went into the Fantasy Index magazine draft. I had the 5th pick, and Bijan Robinson got to me at 5. I never saw that coming. So I took Bijan Robinson. I feel really good about that. And that changed my strategy going forward. You don't know what your opponents, what their biases are going to be, what their oversights are going to be. One year when Le'Veon Bell was holding out, I was in a salary cap draft where somebody didn't know it and bid Le'Veon Bell to the moon and then said, wait, what? He's holding out? And that was a holdout that had some teeth. I don't know that we're really that worried about necessarily Terry McLaurin's holdout or what's going on with Jennings in San Francisco. That remains to be seen. And who knows how ready they will be to play football when they finally do come back. But leave yourself, be flexible, have a plan, but put it in pencil. Be ready to erase it and go in a different direction when opportunities present themselves in the middle of a draft.
Not to talk about Drew Davenport again. I always like when he talks about his par sheets that he'll go in with 2 or 3 different par sheets, depending how the room goes, right? You have to have that flexibility. You have to know what are you going to do if a Bijan falls to you and you don't expect it. Are you going to skip him because you said you're going 0 RB? Or are you going to adjust on the fly to what the room is doing? And you have to be able to pivot.
Absolutely.
Doug?
Yeah, 10 to 15 seconds, and then I'll make it quick here. So in the Pros versus Joes drafts here, they've done. I've watched 2 of the first 3, and I think in each one, Bijan went 4. Okay, if the guy at 4 was thinking, oh, I'm going to go 0 RB, are you going to pass it Bijan at 4? I don't think so. So again, have the idea of how just like you said with Drew having 2 or 3 different par sheets, have 2 or 3 different ideas of how you're going to start your build because you don't know what's going to happen, and you may land Bijan at 4 or 5, like Scott was saying.
And I talked earlier about my favorite Tarantino movie being Pulp Fiction, which is a story told out of sequence, right? Told out of chronological order. And that's an auction or a salary cap draft, right? The ordering won't make sense. The backup, Jordan Mason might get brought up before Aaron Jones, and you have to try to figure out how that works out. The players don't have to be introduced in any specific order. Some people may try to sneak a defense through early on, see if people are paying attention. Some people will come out with a high bid and see if they can price line. I'm going to throw this number out. I'll take it if I get it. If the people overbid me, I'll back off. Some people just have to walk everything up dollar by dollar. But it's a story told out of sequence. And that's one of the reasons why I love that format and why after every one of them, I think I'm a good auction player. But after every one of them, my head is spinning because you went into directions you never could have seen coming. The regular standard draft is much more linear.
Yeah, I love that about auctions. I need to do more of them. All right, gentlemen, it's about time to say goodbye. A big thank you to Scott for his time. Scott, can you let the people know where they can find you and anything that you're working on?
Yeah, all the social medias, Blue Sky, Twitter, easy to find. Not too many Scott Pianowskis out there. And we have 28 days of fantasy coming with Yahoo in August. I believe August 4th is the day. We're letting you in on a bunch of secrets and stuff, exciting new changes to the draft stuff and ways you can play. And just, I'm really excited about what's coming here. It's only about a week and a half away. So it's a great year to be playing at Yahoo. And this week I've been doing all my player tiers, player prices, give you a sense of how I feel about the 4 main positions. But we're basically doing football content every day until the season starts. And then we'll be doing plenty of it in season as well. But can't say enough. August 4th, circle it on your calendar. It's when we let our 28 days promotion come out. and you'll get an idea of what we have in store for you at Yahoo Fantasy. It's a great year. We've been doing fantasy, I guess, for 28 years. I think that's why that's 28 days of fantasy. I think I have that right. I wish I could tell you more about it, but just promise me you're going to be excited in about a week and a half. I hope you play on Yahoo this year.
And listen, you have to read Scott's writing. His top 25 players, fantasy players, was a fantastic article. It was a nice walk down memory lane. Good memories and bad memories, depending if I had the player or faced the player in the playoffs. Doug, what are you working on?
Yeah, so you see me at the socials. That's Blue Sky and Twitter. Article I just had drop at FF today. It was called Splitsville. It analyzes 6 of the more intriguing, shall we say, splits from last season. And I'm not talking home road splits or December versus September splits. I'm talking about actual meaningful splits. So go check that out at FF today. And I do want to make one announcement, and I'm glad, Scott, you're here for me to announce it too. So as of last week, I will be now the new lead editor at The Huddle. And so that's a full-time job in the industry I've been looking for 4 years. And so I'm happy to announce that officially now. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So JJ, take us home, please.
Well, thank you for everybody who tuned in. Sean, Vince, thank you so much. Thank you to Scott for all of your work. I'm at JJ Wenner on the socials. You can follow the pod at FF Diehards on X. We will be back next Wednesday at 8 p.m. with Darren Armani. And until then, be safe, be well, and as always, boat drinks, my friends, boat drinks.